Because, I mean, isn't that the point of being healthy, right? Or being well, is so that you can live your life and enjoy it, and like within your abilities and your finances and whatever your reality is, do the things that you want to do and feel the way that you want to feel.
This is the Unquiet Sisterhood podcast, where we have uncensored, unapologetic, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about shit that matters in the lives of women. I'm your host, Jen Pavich. Hey there, welcome to episode 12. Today I am talking with Jenny Mahan. Jenny is a registered nurse and she is a health coach. But before you turn off this podcast, I promise she is not a skinny blonde white lady standing here in a spandex tank top holding a green smoothie. Jenny's approach to health is about nourishing yourself and finding joy in nourishing yourself. And I love the way that she talks about all things health related and about looking at our bodies and our lives in a different way. So thank you so much for being here, Jenny. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
So to get started, I would love to talk about one of the things that I've seen you write about a lot and kind of allude to in different ways is how much shame there is in our health culture and sort of how that affects people when they're looking at their health or thinking about going to the doctor or they get a diagnosis or any of those things. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that play out? Because you're also a registered nurse, so you've kind of been on both sides of the health fence in terms of traditional medicine and also, kind of more alternative medicine. So yeah, just tell me about that and about how you got started wanting to do this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a important thing to acknowledge because there's so much shame surrounding health, and often, unfortunately, it either comes from or is reinforced by in the medical community, purposefully or not. I worked for the last 10 years as a visiting nurse, so a home care nurse. I go into people's homes and take care of their wounds and draw blood and set up medications, all that good stuff. And the thing that I found over and over was that, people want their wounds to be healed and, to do what I'm there to do. But what they really valued most, obviously, was to have a medical person have and take the time to just sit with them and listen to them and spend the time to really deeply hear what they're saying and to believe them. Over and over again, I hear some version of the story that somebody went to the doctor or whatever health professional, not to only pick on doctors. And, they felt like their story wasn't listened to, or they didn't believe them, or they were actively, they were actively told they were wrong about whatever their experience was and why it was happening to them. And, there are things that lay people maybe don't always understand about a condition and why it's happening and what needs to happen to improve it. But having said that, very, very often, we are in our bodies our whole lives. We know our bodies better than any outside person can possibly ever know it. And medical people need to listen to that, because even though as medical people, we have knowledge and experience to share that will help, there's so much that a person knows about their own body that we can never be cued into if we don't listen to them and believe them. So anyway,
so yeah, they're the ones that are in the body.
Right. And I've experienced this, going to the clinic, and to be fair, part of the problem is people who are working in a facility, whether it's a hospital, a nursing home, or a medical clinic, are kind of driven by insurance companies and protocol and really, really time limited. It's nearly impossible to have the experience I was lucky enough to have in home care in a facility setting.
It's very like production line.
It's very assembly line. Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of the medical professionals within that don't have control over that setup, and they're trying to do the best they can within that. Having said that, there's certainly a large amount of fat bias or stigma,
Mm-hmm.
but also just things like, I think we medical professionals are prone to, I hesitate to say arrogance because that's more negative than I mean it, but there's a term about, patients being non-compliant, which basically is like they
Mm-hmm.
refuse to do what we say they should do. And that's always
Yeah.
bothered me because they are their own person and they have the right to decide what they want to do with their bodies and their health and how they want to treat something or not. And that's completely how it should be.
Yeah. And and it's interesting that you say that, like sort of about the arrogance piece or and I get like, that's not quite the word that we're talking about, but I spent a long time working in the medical research world. So I've worked with a lot of doctors and interns and researchers in my time. And I think there is a certain something in that culture, like in the culture of, so having worked in teaching hospitals, kind of in that culture all the way up, that breeds a certain dynamic of needing to be the person in the room that knows everything and never kind of show any doubt or whatever, because if you do, you're going to immediately get kind of lambasted very publicly.
Yeah.
And I do think that breeds kind of more of a dictatorship than a dialogue.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. To be fair, we live in a very litigious society. It's an incredibly stressful profession. Whatever medical profession you're in is most likely incredibly stressful, especially if you work in a facility of some sort. There's a lot riding on the decisions that you make, and so, yeah, that feeds into a lot of that. But getting back to your question about shame, because that's so important. So how that I see that rear its head, or the effects of that I see over and over again are people feeling bad about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore really struggling to do what they think they need to do or should do to be healthy, because shame never motivates us in a healthy way, right?
Right.
And or getting defiant and a little bit rebellious, like this. People are often very angry. They feel like the doctor didn't listen to them, the doctor didn't hear what they were saying, or was actually actively rude to them, or whatever it was. And so then they're kind of like, screw medicine, I don't have to listen to what they say, and what do they know? And sometimes that's fair. But that's not that doesn't put us down a road to kind of wholesome wellness either. So it's really just counterproductive all the way around.
And it's, like when someone comes in and feels like, and I can say this as a fat woman, like when sometimes you walk into the doctor for anything from like a migraine to like, a sprained ankle, and the first thing they want to tell you is how you need to lose weight.
Yeah.
That does bring up a lot of shame. And when you get into that place of shame, it doesn't make you want to take better care of yourself. It makes you feel shitty and like you don't deserve to be taken care of. So it's just kind of like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, totally. I had a coaching client say to me once, she said, I need to lose 100 pounds, but it all feels so overwhelming and impossible. And so I just go eat chocolate. And I think that
that's
kind of
about it.
Sums it up, because when the focus is only on weight loss or some kind of negative benchmark, and by that I mean, either losing weight or bringing down a lab reading, or, stopping a certain behavior or something, people people aren't motivated. We're human critters like any other critter. We're not motivated by fear, facts, and force. We're not motivated by negative reinforcement long term. And so that's pretty much almost always what's happening when people go to the doctor, or even, often to a dietitian, or whoever. And again, I don't want to knock these folks because they're hardworking folks, and most of them are
Right.
good-hearted people trying to do a good thing in the world. But, you know, it's a rough system. And a lot of us as medical professionals aren't trained in human behavior change, which is kind of where it's all at.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's absolutely true that doctors don't necessarily always understand that behavior change piece. But talk about your background is nursing. How is that different? How is your interaction with patients sometimes different than that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I'm lucky to have worked as a home care nurse. So I have built in kind of a luxury that most medical professionals don't have, you know, just having time, one-on-one time with folks. So that's a piece of it. But as nurses, we're trained, nursing, I think, is a more holistic profession than people realize a lot of the time. You know, we're really trained to look at the whole person, you know, their socioeconomic factors and everything plays into health, and the decisions they make are able to make, and all kinds of things. And, you know, as one example, we're trained in what they call therapeutic listening, which is basically kind of a form of coaching, which is kind of what the piece of nursing that I always loved the most was that time with people to really deeply hear them and listen to them and reflect to them and help them kind of, you know, sit with their experience and process it and kind of figure out where to go from there that works for them in their life and their abilities and their finances and all this stuff and their emotions. And so, you know, as a home care nurse, I loved that work, but I also kind of was getting frustrated because even there's like hours of documentation for every hour of time with a person and this kind of stuff. And a limited ability to really get to the roots of problems with folks. And I kind of felt like I was, you know, metaphorically putting Band-Aids on problems rather than really helping people heal. And that's kind of what, you know, that therapeutic listening passion and that wanting to get to the roots of things with folks is what kind of took me into coaching. And yeah, I do
That makes
both
total
still.
sense.
But.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because when I hear you describing that, like, you know, sort of the therapeutic listening and all of the things that can come up through that, like what occurs to me is I think for a lot of people, there's a sense of whatever their health condition is. Like I know for a lot of people, weight might be a factor, but anything from, you know, blood pressure to cholesterol to, you know, diabetes or prediabetes, like all of the things. Like I think there's this sense for a lot of people that when I go to the doctor, what's going to be taken away from me?
Yes.
What am I going to be told that I can't do anymore, or I can't have anymore, or I can't, you know, like I even think of, you know, even in terms of aging, I know, you know, I've had family members and family members of friends who avoided the doctor for years because they didn't want to be told that they shouldn't drive anymore.
Yep.
Or that they didn't want to be told, you know, so it's the sense of like, what's going to be taken away from me.
Yes.
And in working with you, and full disclosure, I've worked with Jenny. One of the things that I loved was I feel like your approach is so much more about what can you bring into your life rather than what can you take out.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. I over and over again, you know, people maybe at the older end of the spectrum of life are worried about letting on to family or medical professionals that something's going on because they're afraid that they're going to take their home, they're going to put them in a nursing home, you know, all kinds of, they're going to take their car. I had a diabetic nursing client for a long time who had really out of control blood sugar readings, you know, in the like 500 to 600 range, which if people don't know, like 100, 120 is kind of normal high.
Wow. Okay.
So like seriously problematically high. And for a long time didn't even tell me he was, you know, they were writing down different numbers because they were ashamed to tell me what they really were that would then reflect how they, you know, in their mind, how they had been eating and whatever. And we finally had a heart-to-heart about it, and they ended up going to a dietitian and getting some diabetic education, because somehow in all their life they had never gotten that. But they came back and they were so excited and relieved to report to me that they didn't have to give up their nightly bowl of ice cream. They just needed to eat a little, like kind of a reasonable amount of it, still a totally enjoyable amount. And I mean, that's kind of cutting back in a way, but there's totally ways to be healthy and feel better that don't involve always cutting something out or letting something go or stopping doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, those things don't work. We as human critters are not able to keep that up long term. It's just not sustainable. And it's actively harmful. This is the kind of thing that leads to weight cycling and disordered eating, and not to mention, anxiety and shame and confusion and all the stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Whereas adding in stuff that you enjoy, you'll actually keep doing it. You'll enjoy doing it. It'll become this whole like positive synergy, this, positive momentum starts building for folks that becomes a really beautiful thing. Because not only do you feel better, but you're also enjoying it, which I think for a lot of people just seems really impossible because we've been told it has to be this other way.
Yeah. And I think too, when you're adding things in and seeing the positive benefits of adding them in, you start physically feeling better without that feeling of, the cost of this is depriving myself of this, that, and the other, or the cost of this is forcing myself to do this.
Right.
Or that kind of thing. It's really adding it in a way that you enjoy gives a different feeling. It's like a win-win.
Yeah.
Instead of I'm giving up this to get this. And it's
right.
just a completely different feeling.
Yeah. And because I mean, isn't that the point of being healthy, right? Or being well, is so that you can live your life and enjoy it, and like within your abilities and your finances and whatever your reality is, do the things that you want to do and feel the way that you want to feel. And, that looks really different for all of us because we're all really different. A middle-aged woman with fibromyalgia and arthritis and, 3 young children, her experience of that is going to be very different than, a 20-year-old male who's a college kid or whatever. Or even I've taken care of quadriplegic folks who are some of the most positive about their health of anybody I've known, because they really own it and kind of they drive their own decisions about how they want things done and what the experiences they want to have, which has been really inspiring to me, because it's not just about being an able-bodied person. It's about feeling as good as you can within the reality of your life.
And I think you really hit it with what is the experience that you want to have, because I think that that's not necessarily how we look at health in our culture, which is very patriarchal and capitalist, right?
Yep.
And in a capitalist culture, and I think that this is definitely, the medical community is not immune from the rest of our culture.
No.
They are not immune from fat phobia. They are not immune from what's trendy right now, which I think we're going to talk about more in a minute. They're not immune from, kind of the same capitalist mentality that drives so much of everything in our culture. And I think that when I see a lot of people talk about health and wellness and self-care, it's almost like the idea is that your body is this machine and you owe its productivity to the world. So therefore it is your duty to maintain it in a way that it can continue to produce and be the cog in the machine for the rest of the world. And that's really not very fucking inspiring, I have to say.
No. Have you ever felt like doing anything motivated by some report about the cost to the economy of your illness?
Oh, hell no.
That doesn't motivate me. It doesn't motivate anybody that I know.
No. And even when we're not talking about illness, like I feel like, there's this kind of dichotomy of it's partly the beauty industry, right? Because we completely conflate health and beauty, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
And then it's partly kind of this, you know, you need to be in the best shape you can, women, so that you can work harder, make more money, and also still continue to take care of everyone else, do all of the emotional labor in the world, and basically, you know, just be able to work a 19-hour day until you drop and then get up and do it again tomorrow. So you have to maintain yourself like you'd maintain like a car or something,
Right.
you know, so that it can just like keep on trucking. That's your job, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, like we've talked about before, everything that we are taught in our modern, you know, industrial, capitalistic, patriarchal culture about being healthy is for other people or for other systems. It's not just for us. You know, it's always so that, you know, like to use that. Well, I don't like to use, it's often used in the health field, that oxygen mask metaphor where, you know, you're on the plane and the stewardess tells you to, you know, in the event to put your own oxygen mask on first and then help the person next to you, because you're no good to anyone if you're not breathing, which is true. But also, like, how about just because you deserve to breathe and like be alive? And I think that there's so many ways this comes at us, even subtle things that seemingly are appropriate, like, you know, telling people that they should be healthy so they can be around longer for their kids, or so that they can play with their kids. And I mean, that's wonderful. And that is what motivates a lot of us. And that's okay. But also to just open that a little wider to include yourself. Like, it's okay to want to feel good just because you want to feel good. It doesn't have to always be for somebody else. And I think also what you're saying, you know, about our bodies as machines, but also the idea that there's like one acceptable kind of machine. And, you know, that's usually thin and white and able-bodied. And, you know, Photoshop culture, the beauty industry you mentioned, and all of that certainly drives that. I mean, you can't look at a magazine or a television commercial or just about anything anymore that's in our face all the time of a human body without it being airbrushed and photoshopped and perfected. Even people that look, you know, quote, normal are still photoshopped. It's just, and it really sets us up for, you know, we're never going to all be the same. There's all different body types. There's all different heights. There's all different everythings. And it's just silly to think that we're all going to cram ourselves into the same skinny body. I mean, it's kind of creepy if you play that out.
But like even the skinny bodies that you see in magazines don't actually even look like that in real life.
No,
like you see those, you know, videos where models basically pick apart what's been done to them.
Yeah, exactly.
In a photo, and it's insane. You know, and really weird when you think about it. Like, I think this whole thing of, and there's a million like Snapchat filters and Instagram filters that do the same thing, but this whole idea of over enlarging the eyes and then like giving these like hollowed out cheeks that all of these photo filters do remind me very much of the this is not a conspiracy theory, it's just an observation. But you know, like the 80s like alien pictures with, like the big huge eyes and like the, you know, it's like in some ways these filters are getting to a point where they're a step from grotesque. And what is it that we're even saying, right? Like I read an article not too long ago, and it was like they had given, I don't know how many young teenage girls, I think they were like 12 to 14, photos of themselves and access to Photoshop, and told them to get it to the point where they would be comfortable posting it on social media. And the before pictures were just fine. They were just like normal girls. And the after pictures all looked exactly the same. So it's like, what are we teaching, you know, girls
right,
about trying to achieve something that isn't even physically possible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that whole thing about if a Barbie doll was a human, it wouldn't be able to walk upright.
Right.
Like she would have to walk on all fours. Like,
Right. Yeah, it's really damaging. I mean, obviously, but you know, it creates a culture where none of us are ever good enough because nobody actually looks like that.
yeah. And it's not, there's nothing in there about how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what's kind of difficult and, you know, I'm not trying to throw the whole mainstream medical community under
Mm-hmm.
the bus. You know, certainly, like, I personally have a primary care doctor that I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, a lot of I think what happens in the culture of the mainstream medical industry is that the whole how you feel gets lost in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, we want your body to be performing at this level, and it's almost like how you feel is secondary if considered at all.
Yeah.
And what I love about your approach is that how you feel is at the center of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, if we're able to step aside for a minute from, you know, everything we've been talking about, like the shame and the stigma and the beauty, the crazy beauty standards that we're all trying to, well, maybe not all of us, but many of us are trying to reach, even if we don't realize it. If we can step aside from all that for a minute and just think about how we want to feel and what the experience is we want to have in our body and in our lives, and then kind of what helps us feel that way, that's a whole, it's kind of a revolutionary thing. Like nobody's ever asked me that.
Yeah.
And that's what it's really about. I mean, I'm, as a medical person, I'm all for, you know, hopefully helping people lower their blood pressure or their cholesterol or whatever, because these are, you know, signposts or, you know, flags of what may be going on. But it's not because that's what's important. It's because it's a symptom of how, you know, how healthy your body is, and therefore how you feel and what you're able to do. I mean, not always. There's plenty of people running around with higher cholesterols that are living full rich lives, you know. But the focus is so much on lab values and vital signs and weight, and you know, there's a time and a place for that. You know, like people with congestive heart failure need to really monitor their weight, because if they have a sudden weight gain, it's fluid retention, and that's hard on your heart. Like there's a time and a place for things, but for the most part, a lot of us could really focus a lot more on the adding in what is deeply nourishing to us. And oftentimes, usually, I would say almost always in my experience, that, oh, by the way, leads to a lot of the outcomes people maybe were looking for to begin with. Not always, but often, you know, whether that's lower blood pressure or less shortness of breath or whatever it is.
And I think you make a good point that these things, you know, these lab metrics can be kind of just signposts or flags that are like, hey, something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sometimes we can know something's going on with our body, but I think so many people are not connected with their bodies that we miss the signs that we might have noticed.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, which is totally understandable and not something that we should beat ourselves up about, because we do plenty of that already.
You know, that's why we have these kind of, you know, lab tests and those kind of things, right? Because they can be like kind of a fail-safe or like a backup.
Right.
For when you know, when you don't notice that something's going on.
Yeah. So I think definitely those things play a role. But what I often also see is people, cholesterol as an example. We get so focused often on lowering that number that we kind of forget to look at how we're trying to get there and how happy it's making us or not, or how it's affecting our daily lives. You know, if you're eating something only to lower your cholesterol, that's probably not the most enjoyable experience. It might be, I guess, but usually not in my experience. And what's the point of that? I mean, food is supposed to be one of the greatest pleasures of life, which also I think is a revolutionary statement in our culture.
Absolutely.
You know, like it's okay for food to be enjoyable and pleasurable and comforting. It's not just, I love the phrase food is medicine, and I also hate it because it is medicine in a deep, beautiful sense, but so often it gets treated as medicine in the sense of kind of like popping a pill or a supplement and, you know, just a way to get to a state that someone else has told us we need to be in, whether or not we want to be eating that thing or enjoy eating that thing or whatever.
Well, and I mean, like thinking of food from the perspective of pleasure instead of guilty indulgence is,
Right.
a revolutionary state that I spent 20 years in being really steeped in diet culture and ending up, at a point where, I was really in pretty disordered eating. I think I was down to like 5 things that I felt were somewhat acceptable.
Yeah.
That's
so common. You're not alone.
Yeah. I mean, because it is, because it's easy to get there, right? There's like so much different conflicting stuff. And, you can read something bad on
About
the
everything.
internet about every single thing that you could possibly eat. Like you shouldn't have meat or fish or, pesticides or like, I mean, I had literally gotten down to the point where I was like, leafy greens, couple other things occasionally is all I should eat. And anything else feels like a sin in some way.
Yeah. Which is sad too, because then, that's obviously not an enjoyable way to live. And then things like leafy greens get a really bad rap because they're seen as diet foods and, these evil things that we have to eat because, we have to. When, actually they can be these really amazingly delicious, nourishing parts of our life if we let them. But, you almost can't say kale right now without people being like totally writing you off. Which is understandable.
Actually, I still love kale.
I do too.
I might put bacon in it sometimes, but I love it.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is so important. And it made me think of, in the medical community right now, there's, they're getting on board with the whole lifestyle medicine idea and like plant-based eating. And to a point that there's, good things about those things, but a lot of it is kind of sliding towards, kind of food and health extremism where, and I think, what was it? Eat Lancet just came out with a big study recently about how humans need to eat in order to save the world, basically, which is noble on one hand. But I was reading an article on Medium the other day about a person who tried to adhere to this diet that they had set out that was, plant-based, and, you're only allowed to eat like, I can't remember if it's like 3 or 4 ounces of meat a week or something, which is tiny. And anyway, they were basically talking about how stressful and nearly impossible it was to stick to this thing, and also confusing. And, not to say that we shouldn't, maybe try to eat more plants or, maybe eat less meat or better meat or whatever, and, eat ethically and, support small farmers and all that good stuff that I deeply believe in too. But we also have to just be realistic about what humans can do within the reality of day-to-day life and not just keep creating these impossible standards to meet, and therefore nobody does anything, but it just kind of furthers all of the frustration and confusion and anxiety and shame and this kind of downward spiral we get ourselves into health-wise, when we could be, like we've talked about, focusing on doing what we can do within our reality in small steps that are enjoyable and allowing that positive momentum, that positive synergy to grow and expand.
Yeah. And I think that stress and anxiety and shame and all of that, that's important too. Like that's important to our physical bodies too,
Yeah.
right?
Physical,
Like,
mental, emotional, spiritual, all of it. Yeah.
like I think when someone walks out of, a medical situation with some kind of a protocol that is so stressful to either try to stick to, or stressful, then it gets stressful when you're not sticking to it too, right? Because then you feel like you're doing something wrong.
Right.
That contributes to our health too, and our happiness and all
Oh,
of those things.
definitely. Yeah.
Like we talk about like stress hormones, like all of these, kind of things.
Mhm.
If I have to be on a special diet to control my blood pressure, and that sticking to that diet or not being able to stick to that diet stresses me the fuck out, I can guarantee that's going to affect my blood pressure too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, stress is one of the biggest things that affects our blood pressure and everything else. I mean, it's all interconnected. We are little universes walking around in our bodies and our minds and our spirits. I mean, we're not just, like you said earlier, we're not machines that you can just pour some oil in once in a while and you're good to go. Like,
yeah,
it's more intricate and beautiful and complicated than that. But also, I almost had this kind of spiritual experience in nursing school studying anatomy and physiology, because when you get down to the level of, cellular processes and like the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain and all these things, you start to realize all this like intricate complexity and all the places things could go wrong, and why don't they go wrong more often?
yeah.
It really kind of starts to make you think about how, as living creatures, we have this driving force, this driving will to live, to be, to whatever, however you want to think about it, inside of us. And yeah, it's not just about rotating our tires. It's about enjoying our experience in these amazing universes we're walking around in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I've heard you like kind of talk about this idea of enjoying your body before. And I think that that's something that we don't maybe think enough about culturally. I think it's really easy to go into a doctor's office and walk out with, oh, maybe my whatever blood sugar is a little high or what have you, and feel like everything is falling apart. But it's also so important to look at our bodies and realize how miraculous they are and
Mm-hmm.
how many things are going right that
Yeah.
we just take for granted every day.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. And that kind of makes me think of, we've talked a lot about food and stuff, and haven't talked so much about maybe movement or like sleep or a lot of these other things that are really
Yeah.
health related that we don't talk about so much in our culture. Well, I mean, we talk about exercise plenty in also messed up ways, um, but things like even just like healthy social connections or connection to nature, being outside, getting fresh air and sunshine, listening to birds singing, or, connecting with community, getting enough sleep, getting quality sleep, which I totally realize is a challenge. That's something I am challenged by.
Same
So
here.
again, it's not like trying to reach some kind of perfect standard, like you must get 8 hours of sleep a night or whatever we're told, but like, just for you within your life and what is possible, trying to enjoy all those aspects rather than force the standard. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately around movement, because I started running years ago. Well, quote running, kind of more like walk, jogging thing, shuffling thing that I do. Um, to be honest, to lose weight. I had a wedding, as many of us women do when we have a wedding coming up.
It all started
Suddenly,
for me.
the weight craze kicks in. I had an old acquaintance I hadn't seen in a while come up and ask me if I was pregnant, when I was due, when I wasn't pregnant at all. So, we all have these experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and for a while that worked and that was fine, but I hit a wall last fall maybe, and I just couldn't do it for the typical reasons anymore. And I don't think I even realized to the extent I was doing it for those reasons until it kind of all happened, realized that it's not about losing weight. It's not about, having a certain Vox or whatever, it's the reason I loved running is because look what my body can do. When I started running, I couldn't ever imagine running 2 miles straight at a time. It just blew my mind that people could do that. And last fall, the training that I was doing, I ended up running 8 miles, which still blows my mind. And,
Wow.
I was still alive at the end and actually kind of enjoyed myself. And, that wasn't for weight loss. It wasn't for anybody else's measurements. It was because I suddenly hit a point where I was like, you know what? I enjoy this. This is like my me time, my alone time out in the woods on the trail. This is, even though it's hard in a way to start with, my body feels good. My mind feels better when I do this. It's my mental health pill, if you will.
Yeah.
There's all these other reasons to do it besides, trying to lower my blood pressure or trying to lose the muffin top or trying to whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so often the focus of our movement is, kind of this end product. And if you're looking for an end product, you have to do things a certain way. You have to do this type of exercise to work on this part of your body, or like, this, that, or the other. When it's so different when you just find some type of movement that you love and that you enjoy and that's fun and that you want to keep doing.
Right. Like I saw a friend online recently posted about her trampoline and this jumping on a trampoline thing that she started. And she was like a little kid, she was just lit up and excited about this. It was so much fun. And that's what we're talking about. Like, it doesn't have to be going out and running. It doesn't have to be working out at the gym. I mean, if those are the things that lay you up, then great, more power to you. But it can be almost anything.
Yeah, it really can. And it's kind of, even things that, I don't know, start out like so simply. Like, so for me, it was, I used to run long ago, far away. But for me, like walking is my big thing. And I can do it for hours.
Yeah.
Like once I get sort of like into the zone, I sort of have to make myself come back and do other things.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point too, that it doesn't have to be this big drastic thing. I always encourage folks to start with really, really tiny steps, because we're so good at overwhelming ourselves and then hating it and then not doing it or feeling bad about it. And if we allow ourselves to, take those teeny tiny steps, they build that positive momentum, that positive upward synergy. Yeah. And so that could even be like sitting in your wheelchair and doing deep breathing exercises, or, arm lifts, or, I know a lot of elderly folks that I work with who sit on their couch and they've got the little, it's like bike pedals that sit on the floor. You can sit on your couch and pedal.
Oh yeah.
There's all kinds of little ways to start that can feel good and make a difference. It doesn't have to be any kind of certain formula.
Yeah. And doing it, sort of in a way that feels good for you, even if you're in a group of people. Like, this is one thing, like when I first started going to yoga, I was very much in the space of trying to be the bendiest person in the room and looking around at the other people who were like maybe taking a pose a step further than I was and being like, oh, okay, so that's where I have to get to, that's what I need to do. And then I had a pretty severe neck injury.
Oh no.
And it took a while before I even could go back to yoga. And when I did go back, things were different. Like I had to be more careful. I had to be more, and in some ways it was kind of a really great learning experience, because it got me to focus on myself instead of the other people in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's, often a wake-up call or something is what it takes to get us to shift our perspective that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like with anything, like an injury, it's like it almost forces you to have to shift your perspective because it's something that's there. And if you're not paying attention,
yeah,
it will remind you
it will
loudly.
remind you. Yep.
So I recently, was something that I had looked at like for the longest time, but I do not consider myself to be super coordinated, but I was very curious about Zumba and I tried it with my daughter last year. And oh my God, it did nothing to reassure me that I am in fact coordinated, but oh my God, I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my life. Like,
nice.
Trying something that's maybe, without the expectation that you're going to be any good at it can be a freeing experience.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny. Exercise classes terrify me. I just, and that just,
me too, for sure.
Yeah. And, it just speaks to how different we all are. And that's okay. Like for me, the idea of going into town to some kind of class like that kind of gives me a little mini panic attack. but the idea of like going out walking in the woods alone or whatever is, a whole different story. Or, with a small group of people, but some people thrive on that and that's their thing. And so, yeah, just again, it doesn't have to be a certain way. Whatever works for each of us is totally fine.
Yeah. And making wherever you are or whatever you're doing work for you is totally fine too. Like, it's like with anything that we're talking about, the diets or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I noticed that you mentioned like the whole losing weight for your wedding thing, which is like such a cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how my whole weight cycling journey started. I was a perfectly, quote, medically acceptable weight when I started planning my wedding. But it's like a cultural thing, right? Like you're supposed to lose weight for your wedding. It doesn't matter if you're a size 2, you're supposed to lose weight for your wedding.
Right.
Right. And for me, that was what started like my whole weight cycling roller coaster journey that ended up, with me being twice the size I started as, and, like whatever.
Yeah, it totally is a cultural thing. And it's interesting though, for me, I've always been a fairly thin person. And that's what was extra messed up is I was still a fairly thin person. And what happened was, I remarried in my late 30s. I can't remember. It was 7 years ago. And, I was starting to hit that like midlife thing where we start, we get a little more around the middle and these changes that naturally happen to all of us around that time, almost all of us. And I've been thinking about that recently, how interesting it is that it's such a given that is something to be overcome, that's something wrong that we need to, get on top of and control, like you were saying. And, lately I've been thinking, what if there's a reason for that? What if at that point in life, there's a reason that our bodies change like that? Because everybody's does. We're not meant to be 118 pounds that we were at 19 or whatever we were our whole lives long. I had an older lady friend who said something really wise and beautiful to me about kind of the menopause time period and some weight gain around there. And she's like, yeah, I got a little spare tire, and people would comment on it. And she's like, yep, life is hard. The road is bumpy. I needed some padding. I just love that. Like,
yeah. And I mean, it makes you wonder with, sort of a lot of these things that we fight so hard. What if there's more about evolutionary biology that we don't understand than we do. Much more.
Oh yeah.
And it seems like trying to fit everyone into sort of the same box is not working.
No, it's not working. diet culture has had its go. It's had its turn.
Yeah.
And, food and health extremism has had its turn, and they've all failed miserably. Like, we've proven it.
Yeah.
There's research, there's anecdotal, there's personal experiences. Like, we've proven it fine. Like,
the
thoroughly.
research has showed us that we are far worse off than when we started this journey.
Yeah. So, let's try something different now.
Exactly.
Because that clearly doesn't work, and it's making us all miserable. So let's do something else.
Yeah. So you work with people one-on-one in your practice.
Yep.
And when we were talking before we started recording, you described what it means to be a health guide. Can you do that for our listeners? Because I just thought it was so beautiful.
Sure. I was saying how my husband and I have actually been talking about my title for my work. And, I'm a certified health and wellness coach along with being a nurse. And I just keep kind of having problems with the term coach, because there's kind of this kind of stereotypical traditional image of like a coach in your face telling you what to do, and that's not at all what it is. And then also, now that health coaching has become more of it is a profession, and it's a growing thing. It's got an evidence base behind it, all that jazz. But unfortunately, there's also a stereotype with that now of, like you said, like the skinny white lady in her spandex holding her green smoothie, or doing extreme yoga on a tropical cliff.
Yes.
Like, that's not what it's about. And he's a fisherman. My husband's a fisherman. And he was saying, well, why not like a health guide, like a fishing guide, or like you said, a spiritual guide, or any kind of guide that, says, okay, you are wanting to have this experience, or maybe you don't even know what the experience is you want to have, but you want something different. So let's kind of like meander down this path together, and I can show you some cool spots to try out. We can talk about some technique for waving the fly rod, or, metaphorically, whatever it is. But I'm not going to tell anybody what to do or what they should be striving for. But I can, like I was saying earlier, be that person who's totally non-judgmental, who really listens and hears what you have to say and believes you. And then, we can work together to figure out really those tiny steps, kind of how to start moving that direction that works for each person, because, everybody's abilities and finances and geography and all sorts of factors are different. The same, it's not like you can just sell a meal plan or a 5-day exercise program to everybody and it'll work for everybody. That's kind of bonkers.
Yeah.
So that's not what I do. So I'm toying with kind of the health guide title a little more, because I think that captures a little more the essence of how I try to work with folks.
Yeah. And I mean, I can say, as someone who's worked with you, I've taken a couple of your classes and we've done some one-on-one work, that it has felt different than anything I've ever done before. I've actually worked with other health coaches and kind of, usually more in the weight loss space, because I don't actually have any diagnoses or anything like that. So, but, I started working with you because, as we talked about, I wanted to feel better. I was noticing some different things. I was, experiencing different things in my body, some of which is probably, like we just mentioned, sort of natural for my stage in life, that kind of thing. But I have to say that your approach is so compassionate that I never felt like, okay, I didn't do what I thought I was going to do here, and now I want to start avoiding your calls because I'm afraid that I'm going to be judged. I've never felt judged. I've never felt shamed in any way. And not only that, but every time I hear you talk about these things, it makes it feel not only approachable, but like something I'm really excited about doing.
Because that's the whole point, right? It should be enjoyable. Life should be enjoyable to the extent we can make it that way. I mean, shit happens, unfortunately, but we can, not make it shittier on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
And
we cannot punish ourselves for our bodies, because they're where we live
Right.
all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you were saying made me think too, I always try to approach with folks I work with, our modern culture has this phrase about trial and error,
Mm-hmm.
but I like to approach it as like experimenting and tweaking, because so often with health goals, or any goals, but especially health goals, we set ourselves up with a really, smart goal, a specific goal. And then when and if we don't achieve it, then we feel bad. We've failed, the error part of trial and error. And because that's not constructive. So, instead looking at it as, let's try this thing and see what happens. And if it doesn't get us where we want to be, then we've learned something about what does or doesn't work for us and what might work better or what we might like to try differently, and then try the next thing. Instead of beating ourselves up about stuff, we're so good at beating ourselves up about things.
Yeah.
And it's just not necessary.
And it's not helpful.
It doesn't work.
Because when you beat yourself up, then you're beat up.
Right.
And you're less able to do, it makes it harder to do the next thing.
Yep. Yeah. I don't believe in beating ourselves up. I don't believe in judging people, because there's plenty of that out there. And like we've talked about, it doesn't work. It's no fun. It doesn't work. So enough of that.
For sure. Well, Jenny, thanks so much for coming on today and talking about all this. I know you have a couple of ongoing programs and some other things coming up, so we'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This was lovely. Thank you.
Awesome.